Hey everyone, this is StarGeek, and today I'm going to be giving you my review of Star Wars Episode VIII, The Last Jedi, my spoiler review. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, please turn away now and go to your local movie theater and watch this film, because boy is this a good one, and I do not want to be the one to spoil it for you. So please do that, and then come on back here and we can discuss it. So if you haven't seen the movie, this is definitely the place for you, where we can talk about all of your thoughts and hear my thoughts on Episode VIII. So there are a lot of things I want to talk about. If you have seen my spoiler-free review that I put out a couple days ago, you know that I saw a double feature of The Force Awakens straight into The Last Jedi, and then The Last Jedi again on opening night, December 14th, at the Cinerama in Seattle. So I had that experience, and that's what I based my original spoiler-free review off of. But since then, I've seen it one more time in a 3D showing at a AMC theater, and so I have a little bit more of a perspective, and I've seen it 3 times now, so I think I know what I'm talking about, and I've gathered my thoughts, and I'm ready to discuss this film in great detail. So I'm going to go down and really discuss every single point that I can think of that I think you'd be interested in, and I want to hear your thoughts too, so please share in the comments, and we can have a discussion here, because I know this movie is fairly polarizing, and I want to know what you think. So let's get right into it. So up on the screen right now is my ranking of each and every Star Wars movie, just so you get an idea of where my mindset is and how I'm comparing these films. But I truly believe that The Last Jedi is the 3rd greatest Star Wars movie, and I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and it's hard to say that The Return of the Jedi is so much lower, considering I've grown up with it and it's so nostalgic for me, but that's just how good The Last Jedi is, and Rogue One was, that they both, I think, have passed up one of my childhood favorite movies. So yeah, this is a fantastic film, and I want to go through each of my points, and let's get into that right now. Beginning with the plot and pacing of the movie, I'm going to go through each little moment and section of the film and discuss how I felt that flowed throughout the rest of the movie. So the space chase at the beginning, where the Resistance is escaping their base on Dakar and fleeing the First Order, was incredible, really. I know that a lot of people think that it's a boring plot idea to have, basically just this long, drawn-out chase through space where the Resistance is running out of fuel and the First Order's just a little bit behind them, kind of just shooting at them, but they can never really do any damage. I understand why that might bug some people, but I really felt like it gave a great amount of tension to the first half of the movie, and it kind of continued into the later parts of the movie too. But it was a great setup, especially at the very beginning of the movie, with this bombing attack on the First Order Dreadnought, and I'll talk about ships and stuff like that later, but the bombing attack on the First Order Dreadnought was a really great way to set up drama and comedy and heartbreak right at the beginning of the movie, and it kind of explains the path that this film goes on throughout the rest of the movie, kind of foreshadowing how you'll feel and all the emotions that you'll run through when seeing the Last Jedi. So yeah, the humor in this movie is set up right from the beginning in that scene, and the space chase, I guess you'd call it, really just draws that out and brings to life a really fun, entertaining, somewhat reminiscent of The Empire Strikes Back, and Millennium Falcon fleeing the Empire, the Resistance fleeing the First Order. So I thought it was very fun, and it brought up a lot of new stuff too. We've never in Star Wars seen a ship running out of fuel. So I thought that it was a really interesting concept, and pretty cool to seeing the Resistance dwindling more and more throughout this film as they lose more people and more resources and more hope, and everything's going downhill. I know it's a little bit somber, but that's what the middle chapter of any great saga should really have, any great trilogy or story should have. This little dip in morale, and I think they did it very, very well with this space chase, and the characters on board the ships were all fantastic, and I thought that the relationships were built up very well, and there's a lot more to discuss there, but moving on from this kind of beginning part of the film where they're fleeing the First Order, there's also the training on Octo, I think it's pronounced Octo, the island planet where Luke Skywalker is. So the whole time that we were learning about the Force and Rey was being trained on the planet with Luke on the island, I really, really enjoyed it. Not only for the characters and the setting and all that, but just the way that we were introduced to new concepts and new things about the Force and given backstory on things. Just there was so much introduced and so much development going on the island and that whole section of the film that I'll talk about later on in this review. But yeah, I thought that every moment on the island was truly gripping and really entertaining and fun to watch. The Rose and Finn subplot is definitely and understandably the weakest part of this movie. I actually don't think it was nearly as bad as everyone's claiming it to be. While it may be the slowest part of the movie, especially going to Canto Bight, which is just like basically a big casino. It's an interesting planet, but it definitely slowed down the pace, and it did have a little bit of a preachy message to it. But I felt like there were some fun moments in there too, and getting the development between these characters, these fairly new characters in the Star Wars universe, was fun, and it did set up. A lot of people say that it didn't set up anything or it didn't add anything to the plot, but it set up DJ's betrayal of the Resistance later, which kind of is a big important part for why the First Order was able to track the Resistance on to Crate and have that end battle. So without that, subplot of picking up DJ, that wouldn't really have happened. And on top of that, the kid at the very end of the movie was set up and established based on Rose giving him the ring and all that. So it was a message of hope and showing that anyone can be a Jedi, which is kind of a theme in this movie, trying to show that you don't have to have an origin story to be a great, powerful Jedi or one with the Force, which is reinforced by that kid at the end of the movie who, levitates the broom to his hand and looks up at the stars, hopeful, and it's a nice message to show that this idea in Star Wars that the Force is within everything and everyone has this ability it's a hopeful message, and it's a really cool way to kind of branch off and show that the universe is wider than we may think, and it's not all down to the Last Jedi of Luke Skywalker or Rey. So I thought that was really cool. Snoke's confrontation. So when Rey decides to join Kylo Ren and try to join sides and do the right thing, and he brings her to Snoke, was one of the greatest Star Wars moments I have ever seen. The entire battle with Kylo Ren and Rey and the Praetorian Guards was incredible. Everyone in the audience was clapping and gasping and cheering. It was one of the most entertaining moments I've ever had in a movie theater. And the death of Snoke right before that, leading up into the battle, was incredible. Such a smart way to show that character being killed off. And I know some people had problems with him going so soon without us really learning any of his backstory, but there's no reason to think that we won't get more of an explanation later. And even if we don't, does it really matter? I think that he served his purpose, and killing him off here, while not only creating one of the coolest deaths, not most respectful deaths, but one of the coolest killings in any Star Wars movie, and leading it into one of the best battles we've had in the movies, it was a really great way to show that Kylo Ren is the villain that we want to focus on now. So it was kind of passing the torch on from, you think Snoke is this big, evil, bad, ruler mastermind guy, but really we gotta focus our attention back onto Kylo Ren, who throughout the movie seems like he's going down a path of maybe turning to the light side, and then near the end is kind of dipping back to the dark side and becoming his own ruler and disregarding other people and other forces. So I thought it was a great section of the film and really, really entertaining. And then the last part of the movie is the battle on Crate, which was also very, very entertaining, super fun. It was tense, and it set up a lot of pain for the Resistance, and you could see that they're at their lowest point here. The Resistance is down to just a few dozen people now, and the outreaches across the galaxy, they aren't responding. So we're really in a dire place, but there is still this message of hope with Rey and all of that. So seeing Luke Skywalker, even if it was a force projection or whatever that was, and we'll talk about that later in the review here, but just seeing Luke Skywalker, out in action and doing something spiritual really in this moment, but it was so cool to see him there, especially after this chase towards these giant AT-M6 walkers, which were really cool, on this beautiful completely white flat planet of salt that when it comes in contact with something, lifts up and reveals this rich red substance underneath. It was so visually stunning and impacting. It was really great to see just how beautiful the cinematography and the look that this gave the movie. But beyond that, just the whole idea of Luke's distraction there, trying to, he's giving the Resistance a way to escape, was really well done, I think, and there are a lot of complaints about that we'll talk about later, but I really thought it was a great way to end off the movie on that note, and having Luke and Leia reunite was really cool. So let's go one by one through all of the old characters, the original trilogy characters that were featured in this film, and how were they represented. So Luke Skywalker was definitely the biggest one, and a lot of people had problems with how he was presented as this curmudgeon-y old man who's, done with the Force and done with the Jedi ways, trying to just live out the rest of his days alone, secluded on this island, and they didn't really feel like that represented Luke's spirit. But I think that as we are shown throughout this movie, how Luke's spirit has been crushed, and how all hope has been drained from him, and how his alliances have kind of fell from the Jedi Order, and trying to give balance back into the Force. It was really well done and filled in, or was able to give us enough information to fill in ourselves the backstory and the history behind Luke. And we know that he hasn't been this curmudgeon-y old man throughout the entire period, the past 30 years or so. This is a more recent, since, the failure of training Kylo Ren. So, there's more to this character than maybe people are seeing in the film, but I felt he was dealt with very well, and his weaknesses were shown brilliantly with his cowardice to, train another Jedi when his failures had left such disaster before. So there was a lot of cool stuff going on with Luke's character in this film, and I thought it was a great reintroduction to him too. His sacrifice at the end and the whole spirit of the Force that he brought back into this movie was really great, and I thought it was a cool way to, reintroduce an old character, an old fan favorite, similar to how they reintroduced Han Solo, really. Princess Leia was one of the shining parts of this film, by far the best performance that Carrie Fisher has given in a long time, and a really great way to send her off in her final film. It was really stunning. Truly, every moment that she was on screen, she completely stole the moment, stole the scene, and she did a fantastic job. So it was great to see such a beloved character in so many great situations, and her character was kind of reborn and reevaluated, so that we understood more about her connection with the Force, and her thoughts on the Resistance, and the her viewpoints on the galaxy at this point in her life were really all very interesting. Going into some of the side characters of the original characters, like Chewbacca and C-3PO, and specifically R2-D2 I want to talk about. These three characters are I think that this movie could have done a lot more with them. And I understand that they're side characters, and they definitely shouldn't be focused on too much, but they are beloved original characters that are featured in this movie, but only for a few moments, and for a few throwaway jokes or lines at best. Really, Chewbacca had a couple moments where he was the focus, but nothing where he really played a huge role in the movie. He piloted the Millennium Falcon at the end, he did some cool tricks and stuff, but that's about all he did. He, knocked a door in on Luke's hut and was just kind of there occasionally the rest of the time. So he, without Han Solo, seems like they're trying to kind of lean away from Chewbacca and not give any focus to that character, which is a little bit sad. And the same thing goes for my favorite character, C-3PO. which, if you're new to the channel, I know it's a weird character to have as your favorite, but it's just, one of those nostalgic things for me, and seeing him so often on screen, but not really doing anything. The thing that made 3PO so great in the original trilogy is that he was always in peril. He's a character who doesn't want to be in peril, but he's always being thrown into these situations as a supportive character who is never the focus, but was kind of the custodian of the Star Wars story. And he and R2-D2 are the ones that we view the whole entire experience of the Skywalker saga and beyond through the lens of their eyes. And so seeing them get kind of cast aside in this movie was a little bit sad, but I understand that they're trying to, move on from the original characters, which is why they keep killing them off or, having them kind of have less participation in the films. But, it would have been great to see the droids do something a little bit more, especially together, because R2-D2 got it the worst in this movie. By far, R2-D2 is a beloved Star Wars character who in The Force Awakens was left, to sit and rot and not do anything until the very, very end. And then at the end of The Force Awakens, they tease it as if he's going to have some sort of, impact on the island and do something. But instead, we get maybe 2 to 3 scenes at most with him sitting in the Millennium Falcon kind of doing nothing. Luke had one scene with him, which I'll talk about later, which was really great. But that was like a minute-long scene, and other than that, R2-D2 was barely featured at all. It really felt like they were casting aside the old characters in place of new ones. So, it was sad to see these 3 beloved side characters kind of not get featured very much, but I understand the reasoning behind it. And it didn't really detract from the film too much. Han Solo was teased that he might show up somehow in this movie, but really the only way he shows up is through spirit, through the dice. We see the dice that represent Han Solo and played a role later on in the movie. I thought it was a great way to pay homage to the idea of Han Solo, and they talk about him a lot. But again, we didn't really get to see him at all in this film, because he's dead. So that might have played a small role into why we didn't see much of Han Solo this time. Admiral Akbar was an interesting one because they, right at the beginning of the movie, just killed him off, and it felt a little bit disrespectful to such a beloved fan character, as small of a role he may have played. He is a kind of a cult figure, and to see him go so without any purpose, really, such a quick and kind of sad death, not much of a meaning behind it, was a little bit not upsetting necessarily, but a little bit odd, an odd choice, especially, for something that's, a character who's so beloved, but it's not a big deal. Admiral Akbar, we can get over, I think, but yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about that. Yoda is the last one I want to talk about. It was a huge surprise to me and to everyone that I saw in the theater. So Frank Oz came back to voice Yoda in this movie as a spirit, as a Force ghost, and he did incredible. I loved Yoda in this movie. Not only did they use a puppet Yoda, which looked really good for the most part, but just all of his little moments of wisdom and that whole scene of him igniting the Jedi library or whatever you'd call that tree thing ablaze with the lightning was really, really cool, and seeing his wisdom to Luke as he is still the greatest mentor, or the overall mentor to even the Last Jedi, as Luke is described. This kind of mentor coming back and getting a little homage. It was a way to, pay respect to a really great character, and to also show fans Yoda one last time, which was pretty darn cool. Let's talk about the sequel characters from The Force Awakens that we saw again in this movie. So Rey played a huge role in this film, especially with Kylo Ren. Both of them were kind of connected throughout almost all of the movie. Rey explored a little bit more of the dark side of the Force, and we saw her looking deeper into, that dark path that we saw her going through, that pit in the that hole on the island, and experiencing that weird mirror scene where she's trying to search for her parents. Clearly, feeling a stronger pull towards the dark side, the same way that Kylo Ren did, but still fighting it and prevailing in the end as a full light side, user, or whatever you'd call that. And Kylo Ren was kind of the opposite, softening up a little bit to a certain point before war, again, after Rey, prompting him to come with her and help out the Resistance, trying to get her to join him in ruling the galaxy, basically, was what that scene was. It was a very similar scene to Darth Vader inviting Luke, or, imploring Luke to join him on the dark side. Kylo was kind of doing the same with Rey. But no, they both played great roles, and I found them to be really, really entertaining. Kylo Ren fit in much better this movie than he did the last one, and I think they were both developed much better and showed their flaws and their character traits that we were able to explore much more in this film than we did in The Force Awakens. So both of those characters I thought were greatly benefited by this movie and focused on really more than anyone else. So I think they both came out on top very well. So bravo to the development of those characters. Finn was an interesting character in this film. He didn't have a huge role, but his storyline with Rose was kind of nice. I know that it was a little bit slow in parts, like I've talked about, but it was a good character development and showing Finn expand his role a little bit more and learning more about Finn. Again, he didn't have a huge role, but it was fun to see him again in the movie, of course. Poe Dameron played a really fun character this time around, where he was this, even more so than the last one, a hard-headed, set in his ways, trigger-happy fighter pilot, and he was really fun, and I mean, there's not a ton to talk about with Poe other than he was definitely someone that you could kind of see the movie from your lens through, so you were kind of experiencing and having the same thoughts that he was. BB-8 definitely took the spotlight this movie around as the not only the droid of this new trilogy, but also as the sidekick, basically the main sidekick of the entire film. And he had a bunch of fun moments, but also mainly just used for comic relief and some R2 style beating up of bad guys and things like that. Didn't play a huge role or a very vital role, but he was still fun to see, and it's great to see that they are trying to incorporate and bring their new characters more into the main plot of the story. General Hux was a character in The Force Awakens who I didn't really care about. He was just kind of, a First Order soldier, like Imperial, guy. But he didn't really do much other than that one cool speech he had. He wasn't really that interesting. In this one, he is definitely the butt of almost every scene he's in, the butt of the joke, but it's still a really fun character this time around, where you can see the struggles he's having, always being on the bottom end of things, where he's worked so hard to build up this position of power, and he just keeps getting torn down. He was so entertaining to watch in this movie, and huge props to Donald Gleason for having such a great performance. I thought it was really, really fun. Captain Phasma was just about as bad as she was in the last one. Really, I think that she's the weakest character in this movie, and was the weakest character in The Force Awakens too, because she doesn't do anything. Just because she has cool armor, she's kind of getting the Boba Fett treatment, where people think, oh, she's cool because she has, interesting armor, and that's about it. She doesn't really do much of anything in this movie. She gets that little moment with Finn where she reunites for a moment and gets to finally have her revenge for, like, him throwing her in a trash compactor and stuff, but like, it lasted, 2 minutes, and she put up a bit of a fight, and had her small moment of triumph where, she was able to get DJ to betray the Resistance, even though he doesn't really take sides, and get that moment where she's almost about to execute him, but he basically destroys her, and I hope that she's dead at this point, because she did fall backwards into a giant flaming ball of fire while a whole ship was exploding around her. So hopefully, that character's out of the way, because boy, oh boy, was she not a fun character, really, for me. There was nothing interesting about her, and so hopefully she's gone. I understand if you liked her, that's fine, but I don't know. Captain Phasma, not for me. Snoke, though, was a character who I had very little interest in The Force Awakens, and thought was a little bit weird and cheesy with the giant hologram, but in this film was a really, really fun villain, who not only connected a lot of the plot points, like how Rey and Kylo were communicating through that, like, force bridge, but he also had a great scene where he showed his weakness and his power, too. He seemed very powerful throughout almost all of this movie, until Kylo Ren was able to to best him with that flipping of the lightsaber trick and slicing straight through him was a great death scene. Really, really cool. I understand that people are a little upset that the questions about the identity of this character weren't revealed, but really, Snoke has always, Andy Serkis has been saying since the time of The Force Awakens that Snoke is just Snoke, and I don't think people should be worrying too much about what are the origins of every character. Sometimes, characters are just who they are, and that might be explained later, or it might be explained in a book or in a comic book or something, but it's not really important to the story. He served his purpose for what he was, and was able to pass the torch down onto Kylo Ren as the focus for Episode 9, hopefully. So Snoke was great in this movie, and he was featured in the best scene of the movie, really. And his powers with the Force lightning and the Force push, whatever that was, he was holding Rey up and, trying to force the information out of her, was all really, really fun. Snoke was a great character. Moving on to the new characters of The Last Jedi, we have Rose Tico, I believe is how her name is pronounced. Rose was actually a pretty fun character. She didn't serve the plot very much, but she was a character who we were able to see Finn interact with a lot, which was, I thought, very entertaining for the most part. And her spirit really represented the spirit of a resistance fighter and the hope that side of the war has. And I thought that she was a great representation of the light side, of the good side of the resistance, the good side of the Force, all of that. She was a good soul in the movie, and so I felt that she played a positive role that I enjoyed. I really did. DJ, also short for don't join, as he says in the movie, don't join because, none of the sides are really that good. It's just, one side blowing up one side one day and then the other blowing up the other side the next. So, Benicio del Toro, I thought he'd have a bigger role. He acted very well, and the stutter that he had, I thought was a really nice touch that gave the character a lot of character. In introducing since we had such a short amount of time with this character, we were able to get his kind of mindset in just a few scenes, which I thought was really cool. And every scene in the movie that he was in was really entertaining and kind of heartfelt, with him returning Rose's crescent moon-shaped medallion thing that she shared with her sister. I thought that was it was a sweet moment, and DJ was able to, while he may have betrayed them in the end, it wasn't out of bad intent or anything. It was just, it's war, it's living, don't join, live free. That's his whole motto. So I thought he was a fun character, actually. Probably the most disappointing out of all the ones. I thought that he'd have a bigger role and a different role, but still a very entertaining character. Surprisingly, Laura Dern's character, Admiral Holdo, was the best new character that they introduced to this movie. She was a fantastic foil for Poe, but also a hero for the Resistance, and played a really, really cool role in destroying the supremacy. Snoke's, Star Destroyer was so cool to see that scene. Everyone, you guys know the scene that I'm talking about, of course. It's one of the most stunning, jaw-dropping scenes in all of the Star Wars movies. The moment that she jumped to light speed and rammed the Raddus right through the supremacy was one of the most breathtaking moments. Everyone in the theater gasped as it went silent, and you could hear the entire auditorium fill with sounds of ohs and ahs and cheers and just complete awestruck people as we see flashes of the ship being destroyed, and then followed after long moments of silence by this loud explosion. Really, really cool. One of the best scenes in the movie, and her character played a really cool kind of dichotomy of being evil on one end, and thinking that she was making all these wrong decisions, and I can't believe that she'd be this weak or destroy the Resistance like this, and then realizing later on that she was actually doing the right thing, and she sacrificed herself for the greater good, and that really worked out, and it was a great sacrifice for a very entertaining character who kind of took the spot of Princess Leia or General Leia, as she was recovering from her fight with space, or whatever you'd call that. So I really, really enjoyed Admiral Holdo. Very good character. And the Praetorian Guards were really fun in one of the coolest fight scenes that we've ever seen in Star Wars. Definitely just side characters, but reminiscent of Imperial Guards, just a little more action-oriented and creative, weapons and action scenes that were very entertaining. So, good on those two. So now we've already talked about the movie for half an hour, and that was only about the characters, so I gotta really pick it up here, moving on to the creatures. So the creatures, we had a lot of creatures in this movie. I was really, really happy with how many creatures they introduced, and they all felt very Star Wars-y, but at the same time very unique, unlike anything that we had ever seen before in the Star Wars universe. So let's start with Porgs. Going into this movie, I truly, truly thought that Porgs would be one of the biggest downfalls of The Last Jedi. I thought that they would distract from the movie, they'd be childish, cash grabs, dumb, non-entertaining, ridiculous Jar Jar Binks, basically, of The Last Jedi, and, kind of ruin moments of the movie, but I gotta be honest, they were actually placed very tastefully throughout the movie. They were there only occasionally for a little bit of comic relief or, just some cute moments that didn't take away from the film at all, I felt. I actually came out of the theater being really happy with Porgs. Not like I was gonna go, buy a plush Porg or anything, but they had so many great scenes, and they were very entertaining characters, really surprisingly. I can't believe how much I enjoyed the Porgs in this movie, going into it thinking that they'd be the worst part of the entire film. So, really fun characters, not too distracting. There were a couple moments where it was like, okay, maybe, the Porg shouldn't smash against the glass and, like, do that press up of the face against the glass on the Millennium Falcon was pretty cheesy, and some of the times where it was screaming and hopping around were a little bit bad, but like the roast barbecued Porg, where Chewbacca is trying to eat that, was a great comic relief scene. So yeah, they were really fun in the movie. The caretakers played a similar role of just kind of being comic relief, but they were still kind of cool, nun-like fish nun things. I don't know what you'd call them exactly, but they took care of the Jedi temples in the island and stuff, and I thought that they were integrated fairly well. They did kind of come out of nowhere, in that first third of the movie. They just kind of appeared there suddenly, and it was like, oh, interesting that they weren't noticeable before, but I think they were shown fairly well. They weren't nearly as entertaining as the Porgs, or less distracting. I think they were a little bit more distracting than the Porgs even, but they're still pretty fun. Fathiers were the horse things. I don't know. Again, these creatures are so obscure and strange that it's kind of hard to describe them, but the horse things on Canto Bight, I thought they were actually pretty cool. They were fast. They were a steed. We hadn't really seen quite the same level of rideable creature in Star Wars, and I thought they worked really well for what they were in the film, and were a great way to show Rose and Finn's escape on Canto Bight. It was just a fun action scene where we were able to see some chase and destruction through a weird casino thing on a rich planet. It was entertaining. So the other really cool new animal featured in this movie were the Vulptices, or the Vulptex. Apparently Vulptices or Vulptices are the plural form of Vulptex, which were the crystal foxes, those crystal critters, as Finn calls them. I thought that they were fun. They were it's a little weird to see just basically a fox that was just made out of crystals, and that was what they made for a character, or for a type of creature. But they were cool, and they played a fun little role of showing the resistance towards the exit, and, leading them to freedom, and they were just kind of in the background, and they worked well for Crate. I thought that they fit in pretty well, and they looked pretty cool. And the one creature that I had a huge problem with were the sea cows, the blue milk, or really green milk. It was much greener than it was blue. Sea cow weird things that Luke milks at the beginning of the movie on the island. Really not a fan of those at all. That was so weird and distracting, and I was not happy. I know a lot of people liked them because it was kind of a nod to the blue milk, and it was a fun Easter egg, but boy, was that distracting and not fun. It took away from the movie. That was one thing that took away from the movie. The rest of it, I felt worked out pretty well, but those blue milk sea cow creature things, not good, gotta say. Moving on to the locations that we saw in the movie, a lot of the film was set on the Radis, the Resistance ship, the Mon Calamari type cruiser, which was entertaining. We were able to explore a lot of a ship, which was pretty fun. And the very beginning of the movie, we saw Dakar again, which is the Resistance base that got blown up. So that's gone, and now they were on this fleeing path to find a new home, being chased through the galaxy by First Order troops. So I thought it was it was entertaining, and it was well done, showing Dakar getting blown up and kind of leaving that part of their past behind them. Octo, I think it's pronounced Octo, but it's the island that Luke trains on, was great. I really liked seeing the dark side exploration that we saw on that island, as well as just the cool scenery and the creatures they were able to fit in there, and the Jedi history that was left behind there. The cool huts, the cool library tree thing, the pit of darkness, the post where the water collection place is, where Luke looks over before he fades away at the end of the movie, that spot. So many cool locations on that island. They really used it well, and it felt very Star Warsy. Really loved Octo. Canto Bight was, I actually thought it was a really entertaining location when we weren't in the casino, which was basically just a casino from Earth, but with some Star Wars things, I guess. They really did not do much to change it or make it seem like Star Wars. There's a big difference if you look at something like the Cantina in A New Hope, where it felt very alien, very strange, and very different and unique. You could tell it was a bar, but it was different than anything we'd seen before. This one was basically, you can see there's that type of game, and there's a slot machine, and there are those and that, and it was strange, and it felt very out of place. Not a huge fan, but I thought it was an interesting idea to have like this cruise world, this luxury land where this horse races happen or fathier races happen, and the rich hang out, and it was an interesting exploration into a part of the Star Wars universe that we hadn't seen, and it was very, very beautiful. It was a pretty place, so that's always fun to see. And the last planet that we saw was Crate, which was really, really cool. Very unlike anything we've seen before. It was flat, covered in salt, and beneath the salt was this layer of red rock or crystal. When you explore deep below the surface of the planet, you had those crystal mines, which were very, very cool. So it was great to see something unique like that, and the salt and the red underneath actually visually was very effective at the end battle on Crate, and was actually a good tell for Luke near the end of the movie, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But when you can see footprints in them showing up as red wherever someone steps on the planet, it was kind of a tell at the end of the movie that Luke maybe wasn't exactly there fighting Kylo Ren if you just look closely. But yeah, I thought Crate was great. Crate was great. Moving along to the vehicles that were introduced into this movie, let's start with the Resistance bombers, which were so cool. I really, really loved the look, the design, and the function of the Resistance bombers, and they played a huge part at the very beginning of the movie and didn't show up after that because of the Resistance's dwindling resources. But it was really great to see, these new type of vehicles that were really effective at taking down a First Order Dreadnought, which was one of the other new vehicles that we saw, which we didn't, really see much of because it was destroyed so quickly, but it does have that giant, powerful laser that was clearly able to completely obliterate the First Order base. So if the First Order has more of those, then they have quite a bit of power on their hands. But yeah, the First Order Dreadnought I thought was very cool, and the Resistance bombers played a great role at the beginning of the movie. Really, really loved how this movie opens. And the TIE Fighter of Kylo Ren was reminiscent of Vader's TIE Fighter, but still very different and very sleek, fast. It felt like it fit Kylo Ren's character very well, so I thought that was a great vehicle too. The Radis is the ship that the Resistance is on for almost the entire movie. That was a cool look at the inner workings of Mon Calamari cruiser. So I thought it was really fun to see that, and it was basically the setting of most of the movie, so it played a pretty big role. The Supremacy is Snoke's flagship Star Destroyer, and that was great, especially Snoke's throne room with the red curtain that catches on fire while they're fighting the Praetorian Guards was really, really incredible. Loved that scene. Loved the setting of that entire starship. It reminded me a lot of the Death Star, just the design and a lot of the moments there of the TIE fighters landing in and the stormtroopers on it. It was the setting for a lot of great moments in this movie, so I thought the Supremacy was very cool. And then, of course, we have the ATM-6s, which were basically just big, giant, amped-up AT-ATs that were kind of like gorillas and looked very menacing and evil and gigantic, and they had these big cannons. They were very cool and used way more effectively than I thought they would be. So I thought they did a great job with those, actually. I was a little worried that it was just, AT-ATs but bigger, but I thought that they were really cool in this film. And then, of course, the clunky old V4XD ski speeders that the Resistance used at the end of the movie against the ATM-6s were really cool, just because of how, Star Wars-y they felt in a lived-in universe as these old rebel fighters that were, low-altitude ski speeders. We hadn't really seen a vehicle quite like that. The closest thing to them would be pod racers, I guess, but these things had this, this ski mount that kind of dragged along the ground to stabilize the ship, and it was really cool. I enjoyed them quite a lot, especially the comedy they brought too, with like Poe's foot, sticking out through a hole in it, showing that their resources are super low. They're at their a very dire hour for them. And this movie had a lot of plot twists and cool reveals too. It didn't really share much more on the backstory of characters like Rey or Snoke, which was, I understand, pretty disappointing to some fans. But it did give us a lot of twists that were, I thought, very well done. And it represented a big theme of hope and loss of hope in the movie. So, for example, when the Resistance is escaping the Raddus and Admiral Holdo, sends them on their way to go to Crate and finally have a moment of freedom and peace away from the First Order, escaping hidden. When DJ suddenly betrays them and the First Order starts taking out those escape pods one by one, it was a really it was pretty surprising, I thought, knowing how a Hollywood movie would usually deal with that type of situation where the heroes get away for a moment and they have their one moment of victory. But this was while they're down and they're finally starting to get back up on their feet, they knock down a whole other level. Was a great, twist and a big loss to the Resistance. And, that's just amplified even more when they're calling for help on their little battleship type looking display screens at the base. And they're receiving none. They've searched every corner of the galaxy, sending out the signal that they need help from fellow Resistance sympathizers and rebels across the universe, and no one's coming to help. So hope is at a dire loss here. It's really in a dire situation, and it definitely sets up the theme of the film very well. And then, of course, the death of Snoke was a huge surprise, huge shock, and done so well, where Kylo Ren is able to outsmart this villainous mastermind who, while that whole situation and the character was very reminiscent of Emperor Palpatine, was a lot more overdone in his just the power that he seemed to have. He was less conniving and slick and cunning, as he was just powerful and crazy and lustful for the dark side and pain and anger and suffering. So I thought that was done really well, though, to see Kylo Ren able to outsmart him by tricking him into thinking that his mind was prepared to kill Rey, when really he was striking down his true enemy, Supreme Leader Snoke. Great moment. And there were a couple cool homages and Easter eggs in this movie too, I think. Other than the dumb ones like the blue milk / green milk of those animals that Luke drinks on Octo, there was also things like the the medical bay that Finn is in at the beginning of the movie is very reminiscent of 2001: A Space Odyssey, and it just felt very much like that kind of like setting and visual imagery. So I thought it was really cool that they were probably taking some inspiration from that. The guards, the police department of Canto Bight, which actually on their helmet says in Arabic lettering CBPD, as in Canto Bight Police Department, which I thought was pretty funny. Their whole outfit and the way that the lettering is written on their helmets is pretty reminiscent of the guards from George Lucas's first movie, THX 1138. So that was pretty cool. There were moments that were similar to The Matrix, with like Luke doing that slow motion backflip thing, dodging Kylo Ren's lightsaber, even though, you know, it was a ruse that he wasn't actually there. He was able to do that kind of Matrix thing, which was pretty cool. And Return of the Jedi was greatly referenced here with the whole throne scene and Snoke trying to get the information out of Rey and trying to get her to turn, and then having Vader strike her down, and that whole setting, the death of, or, you know, the mentor being killed by their student, was all very reminiscent of the end of Return of the Jedi. So I thought that was done well enough that it wasn't in your face, that it was very similar, but at the same time very reminiscent of that. And really, the whole movie, nowhere near at the same level as The Force Awakens was like A New Hope, where The Force Awakens was mirroring a lot of A New Hope. The Last Jedi had a lot of similar things that the Empire Strikes Back featured in it, which were done very well and hidden very well, such as the AT-AT battle was kind of replaced with the AT-M6s at the end. We got to see that same imagery without it being pushed in your face that it's definitely not a copy. It was something very different, very unique and new that we hadn't really seen in the Star Wars universe before. But you know, we have this AT-AT battle, which was kind of flipped. Instead of being at the beginning of the movie, it was at the end. And this chase through space was kind of a big theme of the movie, where the Resistance is fleeing the First Order, just like how the Millennium Falcon was fleeing the Empire. And we have the training on a planet with a mentor, where Luke is training Rey on this kind of, you know, water surrounded land. And the same thing was kind of happened with Yoda being the mentor to Luke on Dagobah in The Empire Strikes Back. So I thought it was done tastefully, kind of paying homage to those other films. So I thought it was done very, very well. And the emotional impacts that this film had were so beautifully done. Small things like Rose's sister Paige sacrificing herself at the beginning of the movie in that bomber run was actually surprisingly emotional. It was a character who we had just met. We didn't even know the name of, the backstory, anything like that. And we were able to feel the soul and the hope that the Resistance had, and the sacrifices that had to be made in the name of their message. And so it was a great way to personify and give character and sympathy towards someone that we had never met before, and who does actually end up playing somewhat a role and connecting later on in the movie by being the sister of Rose and having, you know, her be mentioned quite a lot throughout the movie. But that whole opening scene where Paige sacrifices herself and you know, destroys the First Order dreadnought was really, really surprisingly emotional and very well done. Same thing goes for Leia's use of the Force, like the revival scene where she seems to be blasted out of the ship, and seems like a very cheap death to Star Wars fans of such a beloved character, especially after Carrie Fisher's passing. And so, you know, to see Leia get thrown out into space and discarded like that was so painful, yet to see her come back and recover was also very emotional. As cheesy as it was to have her survive out in space for that long while no one else did, and to like force pull her way back to the ship, it was an emotional moment, and I thought it was done fairly well. Obviously, not perfect how they had this little cop out where she survives and flies through space and stuff, but still. You know, the sentiment was there. And the hologram that R2-D2 projects to Luke when they meet in the Millennium Falcon for the first time after so many years was also a super emotional moment, where we see the original hologram from A New Hope that Luke gets projected by R2-D2. That was a very emotional moment. You could tell in the theater that people were, it was a bit of a moment where, everyone kind of teared up, and it was emotional. And, not only because of Carrie Fisher's passing, but just the nostalgia and the sentiment behind all these things. Star Wars means a lot to a lot of people, and they were able to really tastefully show that and represent it, I thought, very, very well through these homages and references back to the old movies without being too in your face about it. And Rose's moment where she saves Finn, who's about to sacrifice himself. When she saves Finn and he's like, "Why did you do this? Why would you stop me from ending this?" And she makes the comment that they'll win not by fighting what they hate, but by saving what they love. That was a very emotional moment for a set of new characters who we didn't have a lot of time to connect with. Was very well done, and it was a great sentiment that this film tried to get across. And of course, the moment for me that was definitely the most emotionally impacting, and I think it's true for most people in the audience, was Luke Skywalker having his one final moment with Princess Leia at the Resistance base at their lowest moment. And it was just an incredible scene to see him reconnect and apologize for everything that's happened, for them to say, you're here at the end, this is it. And to have Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher in a scene for one last time, I thought was really, really beautifully done. Definitely the most emotionally impactful moment of that film. Every time that I've seen it in the theaters, it has hit me the same exact way. So well done. Especially leading into such an awesome scene with Luke. I thought it was really, really beautifully created there. And especially the moment where he passes on Han Solo's dice to Leia, saying "Nobody's truly gone," was so impactful. I mean, you've seen the movie, and I hope that you felt the same way that I did, and that I know a lot of other people did. That was a very special moment where you almost felt like the entire group was reconnected again, just through that one moment of passing the dice on. As fake as they may have been a hologram or a projection of some kind, but the sentiment again was still there, and I thought it was really, really well done. All of this being said, I totally understand that a lot of people did not like this movie. Currently, as of recording this, the audience score is at 56% on Rotten Tomatoes. That is the lowest score that a Star Wars movie had ever dipped to. It dipped below, it dipped to like 52%. That's insane. So I get that a lot of diehard Star Wars fans are having a hard time with this, and I have no problem with the people who dislike this movie. If you dislike this movie, I'm sure you have your reasons. It's totally up to you how you experience this film, and I'm not blaming you or saying that you shouldn't dislike this movie just because I liked it, or that you're crazy. But I do have a problem with the people who are expressing such blatant hatred and disrespect towards the people who did enjoy this movie, and towards the director of this film, and to Disney even. Listen, Ryan, I mean, I understand the complaints, and I do understand that for a lot of people who, have grown up with these films, this isn't the vision that they had hoped for their Star Wars, and, characters that they've loved for years have been completely changed and taken away so willfully from them. I totally get how this can hurt and feel like Disney or Rian Johnson has disrespected your childhood, or the vision of a fan, or the heart that fans have in these films. But I do believe that, and I think that he succeeded in doing this, that Rian Johnson made this film from a place of love, a place of fandom, as much as anyone would love these movies, and to claim that he is destroying Star Wars, or that this is the downfall of Star Wars, I think is just, in my eyes at least, inaccurate and a little bit disrespectful to someone who I think put a lot of love and effort into this movie, everyone involved. So, if you dislike the movie, that is totally up to you. I recommend rewatching it if you've only seen it once, because I do think it gets better the more you rewatch it. but I'm not gonna force my opinion down your throat or anything. And I do want to actually go over a couple of the problems that people had that I think are valid and should be discussed. So some people are saying that it's too similar to The Empire Strikes Back. I kind of discussed that earlier with the similarities of plot points. But I think it stayed away from Empire, definitely more than A New Hope. And in fact, the bigger complaints that I'm hearing about this are that it was too different and too unlike the Star Wars that we know, which I think is kind of silly to hear after the complaints from The Force Awakens was everyone saying, oh, this is too similar to the old Star Wars, we needed something new, I can't believe that it's just a rehash of A New Hope. And then when we get something new, all the complaints are about how it's this new thing and it should have been more similar to the old stuff. So you can't please everyone, and I understand that there are legitimate reasons for the arguments behind why this movie was disliked by some diehard fans, but I just disagree with them. And then flashbacks this is the first time that we've ever seen flashbacks in this movie, or in the entire Star Wars saga. And there were actually two different viewpoints that we saw too, which was pretty cool. We have Kylo Ren's side of the story and Luke's side of the story. But a lot of people were saying that flashbacks shouldn't be in Star Wars, which is really, I think, quite the nitpick. But I understand if you don't think that stylistically it works. But I thought they did a pretty good job showing the two different viewpoints of the events of what happened with Kylo Ren, and then showing what the real truth was, or what we are made to believe is the true story of how the events transpired. And then the Force. The Force is how I'm going to end off talking about this review, because I've been going for almost an hour now, so it's a long time to end off this review. But the Force was drastically changed. So much new stuff was introduced into the Force, and there were so many new abilities and powers that were talked about that were really fascinating. And I know that a lot of people were upset about how the Force was dealt with and how all these new powers were introduced, but I thought it was a great way to show and expand on this mystical force that we've known for 40 years now, and expanding and bringing something new to the table with it was really, really brilliant. So let's talk about a few specific moments, such as the long-distance Force beatdown that Snoke gives General Hux at the beginning of the movie, where when the Resistance cruiser escapes and Snoke calls up Hux to, give him the blame of, look what you've done, you've let them get away, and he's able to slam him on the ground and, slide him across the ground. That was new to see such a long-distance direct use of the Force in a Star Wars movie. That hadn't happened before. Leia's Force pull after she gets sucked out into space. She survives that and is able to pull her entire body towards the object, towards the ship. In the past, it's always been that the Force is used to move objects, not really to pull yourself towards anything. So that was fairly new, and it's kind of the same thing as when Luke is fighting Rey on the planet, where they have that kind of lightsaber duel with those sticks, and she pushes him to the ground, and he, as he's about to fall, catches himself, and he's kind of levitating there. That's him pushing himself off of the ground, just kind of similar to how Leia was pulling herself towards the ship. So those are kind of different uses of the Force that we haven't seen before, as well as the Force communication / the bridging that we saw between Rey and Kylo. We had never seen such a unique look at communication through the Force, where you're actually visually showing a character or another person interacting with another one, where they can't see their surroundings, but they're able to visualize the person right there in front of them and have a conversation with them so clearly. And that was explained that Snoke was the one who was controlling that and doing that. So we don't know Snoke's full powers before, obviously, he was killed. Yeah, so there's a lot of new stuff in the Force that's being discussed here. On top of that, things like the Force ghosts physically interacting with people. We hadn't seen a Force ghost actually touch someone, like where Yoda beats or kind of knocks Luke on the head with his cane. So clearly, Force ghosts aren't exactly quite as ghosty as we thought they were. They're really more like physical conjurings than anything, if he's able to physically interact with Luke, which was interesting. And he was able to, speaking of conjuring up that lightning that blasted the Jedi archive library tree thing. that was something we had never seen before, them like interacting with weather or having such a direct impact on that in the films at least. So that was very interesting. And the last thing is really force projection, where Luke is able to project his image to Kylo Ren and to everyone at the Resistance base all the way from Octo to Crate, and have this final battle and confrontation with his lost Padawan. So that was very new. And if you actually looked at the ground, there's so many tells as to how that was actually fake before we discovered that he was projecting himself. He looked younger. He probably looked more like the image that he had when he was training Kylo Ren. So he also had his old lightsaber, Anakin Skywalker's lightsaber, which, if you were astute, you would have noticed it was torn in half in just a couple scenes earlier. So that was the biggest tell. To see him wielding that lightsaber, you could know immediately that something was off about Luke there. As well as his clothing, his Jedi garb was all very different than what we had seen him in the movie. And his footprints didn't leave any red, didn't move aside the salt on the ground of Crate, so none of the red showed beneath his feet. They actually showed a close-up of Kylo scraping his foot across the ground, and it leaves a red trail behind, and it shows a close-up of Luke doing the same thing, and nothing. So I think that was another great tell to show that Luke wasn't actually there. Which I thought was a really brilliant idea that was slightly lessened by Luke's dying later on, just a couple minutes later. But it was actually really beautifully done how at the very end of the movie, as Luke has just exerted his energy and saved the Resistance, confronting his failed Padawan one last time, and you see him regaining enough strength one last moment to look off into the sun and see the mirage of a double sunset, just like at the beginning of A New Hope, where we see that this story has come full circle from him being a lone farm boy with dreams of other worlds, staring off at a double sunset, coming all the way around to where he has fulfilled his potential, his life, and we see him staring off at the sunset one last time, a fake double sunset as he fades away. So his whole story had come full circle, and I thought it was done very effectively, very beautifully, really, really nicely done, and really I don't think there would have been any other way for Luke to go. The first time that you see him just fade away, you think it might be a little anticlimactic, but really, it was kind of the only way that Luke could have gone, to be respectful and pay a character the death that he deserved. Even though it may not have been in a blaze of glory, it was a very tasteful death, which I appreciated very much. So that basically wraps up everything that I had to say about The Last Jedi. I mean, there's always so much more to talk about. I've been talking about this movie to the people who have seen it for the past 4 days straight. So I would love to keep the discussion going in the comments. If you're sticking around still after this whole hour-long video, thank you so much. And I gotta say, this is a must-see movie. George Lucas was right when he gave it the review that it was beautifully made. I'd give it a 96 out of 100, third best Star Wars movie ever made. So much right, so much good stuff in this film, and I can't wait to see it again. Round 4 has got to come up any day now. So, if you haven't seen the movie twice already, I highly recommend seeing it again, and getting hyped. I mean, I'm super excited about where Star Wars is going, and really love this movie. Huge thanks to Rian Johnson for making such a beautiful movie, and I can't wait to see where he takes his new trilogy that he was given by Disney. So there's still lots more to come, and I'm excited to see how J.J. Abrams finishes off this sequel trilogy in 2019 with Episode 9. So that's about it. Thank you for listening to my spoiler thoughts on Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. Until we meet again in a galaxy far, far away, this has been StarGeek.